The police file was labeled Operation Shadow, subject, unknown male, target, James Paul McCartney, classification, extreme threat. For 5 years, from 1974 to 1979, Scotland Yard tracked the most sophisticated stalking case in entertainment history. A man who appeared at every Wings concert, stayed in the same hotels as Paul, and somehow knew songs that Paul hadn't written yet. When the case files were finally declassified in 2019, they revealed something that defied explanation. The stalker had been singing Paul's future compositions years before Paul ever wrote them. The investigation consumed dozens of detectives, generated over 2,000 pages of reports, and included surveillance footage from 3 countries. But the most disturbing evidence wasn't what they found. It was what they couldn't explain. Because when Paul McCartney finally came face to face with his stalker in 1979, what the man told him would haunt Paul for the rest of his life and force him to question everything he thought he knew about creativity, destiny, and time itself. If you love discovering the untold stories behind music history's most inexplicable mysteries, you need to hear this. Because sometimes the most terrifying stalkers aren't the ones who want to hurt you. They're the ones who know things about you that you don't even know about yourself. Royal Lancaster Hotel, London, March 15th, 1974, 11:30 p.m. Paul McCartney was exhausted after Wings' concert at the Hammersmith Odeon, but sleep wouldn't come. For the 3rd night in a row, he'd spotted the same man in the audience. Mid-30s, dark hair, always alone, always in the front section, always staring directly at Paul with an intensity that made his skin crawl. What disturbed Paul most wasn't the staring, it was the singing. During Band on the Run, Paul had clearly seen the man mouthing lyrics that didn't exist yet, verses Paul had been working on privately, but hadn't performed or recorded. During Jet, the man had been singing harmonies that Paul had only hummed to himself in his home studio, ideas he hadn't even shared with Linda. Paul tried to convince himself it was coincidence, but when he'd changed the set list spontaneously during the encore, the stranger had seemed to know exactly what song was coming next. The next morning, Paul mentioned it to Wings' security chief, Malcolm Peters. Probably just an obsessive fan who's memorized every bootleg recording, Malcolm suggested. But Paul wasn't convinced. Malcolm, he knew lyrics that don't exist on any recording. Lyrics I've never sung in public. Malcolm made a note to watch for the man at their next show. During Band on the Run, Paul had clearly seen the man mouthing lyrics that didn't exist yet, verses Paul had been working on privately, but hadn't performed or recorded. During Jet, the man had been singing harmonies that Paul had only hummed to himself in his home studio, ideas he hadn't even shared with Linda. Paul tried to convince himself it was coincidence, but when he'd changed the set list spontaneously during the encore, the stranger had seemed to know exactly what song was coming next. The next morning, Paul mentioned it to Wings' security chief, Malcolm Peters. Probably just an obsessive fan who's memorized every bootleg recording, Malcolm suggested. We get a few of those on every tour. But Paul wasn't convinced. Malcolm, he knew lyrics that don't exist on any recording. Lyrics I've never sung in public. Malcolm made a note to watch for the man at their next show. The pattern emerges. March-May 1974. Over the next 2 months, the man appeared at every Wings concert. Amsterdam, Paris, Munich, Rome. He was always there, front section, always alone, always watching Paul with unsettling eyes. Hotel staff reported seeing him in every lobby where Wings stayed. He had resources. International travel in 1974 was expensive and required planning. Wings' tour manager started keeping logs. The pattern was impossible. The man always checked into the same hotels as the band, sometimes on the same floor. This isn't random fan behavior, he told Paul. This is professional level stalking. We need authorities. Scotland Yard investigation, June 1974. Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell had handled celebrity stalking cases before, but the Paul McCartney file was unlike anything she'd encountered. The suspect wasn't sending threatening letters, wasn't trying to break into Paul's home, wasn't displaying any of the typical escalating behaviors that usually preceded violence. Instead, he was simply there, everywhere Paul went, somehow arriving first, somehow knowing Paul's schedule better than Paul's own management company did. "He's like a ghost," Paul explained during his first formal interview with D.I. Mitchell. "He never tries to talk to me, never gets close, never causes any disturbance. But he's always watching, and he's always singing along to songs I haven't released yet." Mitchell was skeptical about the song claims until she reviewed footage from Wings' Munich concert. The venue's security cameras had captured clear audio of audience members singing along, and when technicians isolated the stranger's voice, the results were disturbing. He was indeed singing lyrics that didn't match the official recordings. More unsettling, his harmonies were sophisticated, complex, not the kind of things someone could improvise. These sounded like carefully rehearsed parts for songs that, according to Paul, existed only in his head. The first contact attempt, Glasgow, August 1974. D.I. Mitchell arranged for undercover officers to approach the man during Wings' Glasgow concert. The plan was simple: casual contact, get his name, see if he'd engage in conversation about his interest in Paul McCartney. But when the officers reached his seat, it was empty. Security footage later showed him leaving the venue exactly 30 seconds before the officers arrived. Impossible timing unless he'd somehow known they were coming. "It's like he has precognition," Mitchell wrote in her report. "Subject demonstrates awareness of events before they occur." Mitchell was skeptical about the song claims until she reviewed footage from Wings' Munich concert. The venue's security cameras had captured clear audio of audience members singing along, and when technicians isolated the stranger's voice, the results were disturbing. He was indeed singing lyrics that didn't match the official recordings. More unsettling, his harmonies were sophisticated, complex, not the kind of thing someone could improvise. These sounded like carefully rehearsed parts for songs that, according to Paul, existed only in his head. The first contact attempt, Glasgow, August 1974. D.I. Mitchell arranged for undercover officers to approach the man during Wings' Glasgow concert. The plan was simple: casual contact, get his name, see if he'd engage in conversation about his interest in Paul McCartney. But when the officers reached his seat, it was empty. Security footage later showed him leaving the venue exactly 30 seconds before the officers arrived. Impossible timing, unless he'd somehow known they were coming. "It's like he has precognition," Mitchell wrote in her report. "Subject demonstrates awareness of events before they occur, suggesting either inside information or..." She crossed out the rest of the sentence. Even in a confidential police report, some theories seemed too outlandish to document. The Glasgow incident marked a turning point in the investigation. Mitchell realized they weren't dealing with a typical stalker. They were dealing with someone who had capabilities and resources that defied normal explanation. The song Predictions, September 1974, February 1975. Scotland Yard started recording the stranger's vocal behavior. Using equipment at concerts, they captured him singing complete versions of songs Paul hadn't written yet. September 1974. He sang silly love songs, complete with lyrics. Paul wouldn't write this until 1976. November 1974. He sang Maybe I'm Amazed, with additional verses Paul hadn't performed publicly. February 1975. He sang Mull of Kintyre in Scottish Gaelic. Paul wouldn't compose this until 1977. Either this man is Paul's creative partner, the detective wrote, or he has access to Paul's future output through unexplainable means. The Hotel Room Incident. Rome, March 1975. The case took a sinister turn when hotel security cameras captured the stranger walking past Paul's hotel room at 3 a.m., stopping directly outside the door and standing motionless for 17 minutes. He didn't knock, didn't try to handle, didn't do anything. He just stood there, as if listening. What hotel security didn't know was that Paul was awake on the other side of that door, working on a new song. For 17 minutes, Paul played and replayed a melody on his acoustic guitar, trying to find the right words for what would eventually become Let 'Em In. When Paul finished the song and went to bed, security footage showed the stranger walking away immediately. "He knew I stopped playing," Paul told D.I. Mitchell. "He stood there the entire time I was working and left the moment I put the guitar down. How could he possibly know that?" Mitchell ordered round-the-clock protection for Paul, but the stranger seemed to anticipate even that. He vanished for 6 weeks, only to reappear at Wing's next concert in Amsterdam, as if he'd known exactly when the extra security would be withdrawn. The family threat, June 1975. The investigation reached crisis level when the stranger was spotted near Paul's children's school in London. He didn't approach the children, didn't try to make contact, but his presence near Paul's family crossed a line that transformed the case from unusual to dangerous. D.I. Mitchell authorized a massive surveillance operation. 50 officers, 12 vehicles, electronic monitoring equipment. They were determined to identify and apprehend the suspect before he escalated to direct contact. But once again, he seemed to know they were coming. On the day of the planned operation, he simply didn't appear. Not at the school, not at any of his usual locations, not at Wings's concert that evening. "It's as if he can see our plans," Mitchell wrote in frustration. "Every time we organize a response, he adjusts his behavior accordingly." The breakthrough, January 1976. The case breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a hotel clerk in Liverpool who recognized the stranger from police bulletins. The man had checked into the Adelphi Hotel using the name William Campbell, the same name that Paul is Dead, conspiracy theorists claimed, was Paul McCartney's replacement after his alleged 1966 death. More importantly, he'd paid with a credit card that traced back to a London address. When police raided the flat, what they found defied all explanation. The apartment was filled with Beatles and Wings memorabilia, but not the kind typically collected by fans. These were items that shouldn't have existed. Concert tickets for shows that hadn't been announced, promotional materials for albums that hadn't been recorded, and most disturbing of all, handwritten song lyrics in Paul's distinctive handwriting. Lyrics to songs Paul had never written. In a filing cabinet, police found detailed schedules of Paul's activities going back 3 years, including private family events and studio sessions that had never been publicized. The accuracy was 100%. Every detail matched Paul's actual activities perfectly. But the most shocking discovery was a collection of audio recordings, the stranger singing Paul McCartney songs that didn't exist yet, recorded years before Paul would write them. The Confrontation, Abbey Road Studios, February 14, 1979. After 5 years, Detective Mitchell arranged a controlled meeting between Paul and the stranger at Abbey Road Studios. The meeting was set for Studio 2, the same room where the Beatles had recorded most of their greatest songs. The man arrived exactly on time, 3 p.m., as if he'd known about the meeting, despite its complete secrecy. He was smaller than Paul had expected, ordinary-looking, with kind eyes that seemed older than his face. "Hello, Paul," he said quietly. "I've been waiting a long time to talk to you." "Who are you? How do you know my songs before I write them?" The man smiled sadly. "My name is William Campbell. I know your songs because I wrote them first, in another timeline, in another life." Campbell explained over the next hour. "In my timeline, I was Paul McCartney. I wrote all the songs you've written, performed with John, George, and Ringo. Live the life you're living. But something went wrong in 1966. The car accident that in your world was just a close call. In my world, it was fatal. I've been watching you live my life, writing my songs, making my choices, loving my Linda. But you're not copying me. We're both drawing from the same source. Songs exist outside time, and we're both conduits for them. Paul listened in stunned silence as Campbell sang Let It Be in a version Paul had never heard, with additional verses that brought tears to his eyes because they were so beautiful, so right. I'm not here to hurt you or replace you, Campbell said. I'm here because I need to let go. I need to stop living a life that isn't mine anymore. Campbell pulled out a notebook filled with compositions. Some Paul recognized as songs he'd been working on privately. Others were completely new, but felt hauntingly familiar. These are songs I never finished. Maybe in your timeline, you can complete them. Paul flipped through the notebook with trembling hands. Every song was unmistakably his style, but also something more, as if his own musical voice had been expanded and perfected. Take care of the life I'll never have, Campbell said, walking away. William Campbell left Abbey Road at 5:17 p.m. and was never seen again. The aftermath, Detective Mitchell's final report on Operation Shadow, was classified immediately and remained sealed for 40 years. The official conclusion was, case closed due to subject's disappearance, but Mitchell's personal notes told a different story. Subject displayed knowledge and capabilities that cannot be explained through conventional investigation methods, she wrote. Recommend case be transferred to specialist departments for evaluation. Paul McCartney kept William Campbell's notebook for the rest of his career. Many of Paul's most beloved later songs, Here Today, Pipes of Peace, My Brave Face, were developed from fragments found in Campbell's notebook, though Paul has never publicly acknowledged this connection. When asked about the mysterious 5-year period when he was stalked, Paul's response has always been the same. Some experiences are too strange to share. Some people are too important to forget. The psychological impact on Paul was profound. Linda later revealed that Paul would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, convinced he could hear Campbell's voice singing in harmony with him. It changed how Paul thought about creativity, she said in a private interview years later. He began to believe that songs existed somewhere else first, and that writers were just the ones fortunate enough to discover them. In 2019, when portions of the Scotland Yard files were declassified, music historians were baffled by references to a suspect who demonstrated precognitive awareness of subjects' creative output. The audio recordings of Campbell singing unwritten songs remain in police evidence storage, and the few experts who have heard them describe them as indistinguishable from authentic Paul McCartney compositions. Paul, now in his 80s, still occasionally pulls out Campbell's notebook during private moments. Sometimes he'll play one of Campbell's unfinished songs on his piano, wondering about the man who claimed to be him from another timeline. Creativity is a mystery, Paul reflected in a rare interview about the incident. Sometimes I wonder if we don't write songs as much as we discover them, as if they exist somewhere else first, and we're just the ones lucky enough to find them. The William Campbell case remains Scotland Yard's most inexplicable, unsolved mystery. But for Paul McCartney, it was something else entirely. A reminder that the universe is stranger and more connected than we can possibly imagine, and that sometimes the most frightening encounters are also the most profound gifts.